Play, Watch, Listen is a mostly games industry podcast brought to you by game developers. It features video game writer Alana Pierce and video game composer Austin Wintory, and also usually Mike Bithell, who is a video game director, but he was not able to join us this week, so instead we have a special guest. The show is supported by Patreon, who got an extended cut of this episode and also got it several days early. Thank you so much to our Patreon supporters for keeping this very independent, sponsor-free show alive. Enjoy the show. I'm trying to let Mike Laidlaw introduce himself, Austin.
I know, I'm going to shut up, sorry.
Thank you. Hi, Mike, welcome.
Hello.
Who are you and why are you here?
Well, I'm the Chief Creative Officer at Yellowbird Games. I just released Eternal Strands with the fantastic team up here. I think I'm here because you folks asked me to join, which is cool. I also had the privilege of working with Austin on the game too, so that was pretty rad.
Which I actually did not know until I had already started playing it, and then I was on MinMax and they were talking about it, and they were like, "You know that's Austin?" And I was like, "Son of a bitch, he's everywhere."
He's sneaky.
Yeah, but you've been in the industry for how many years? A long time.
Let's see, 22 at this point.
Were you at BioWare most of that
2022.
Time? Yeah. So I started in 2003 on Jade Empire. Started as a very junior writer with a lot to learn. Made my way to lead by the time I was done. Worked on Jade Empire 2 that never saw the light of day. Worked on Mass Effect 1 for a while. Not super long, but enough to write a whole chunk of the Citadel that eventually got cut. And then it never saw the light of day either. But then the third castle in the swamp stayed up, and I moved on to Dragon Age. Where it had gone through some lead designers. James Allen had been on there, and he'd been working on he'd moved on to Knights of the Old, or not Knights, sorry, the Old Republic, which is the MMO, and then Brent took over, and then I moved in to kind of bring it home to help ship it, and then stayed with Dragon Age until I left BioWare.
So I guess what made you want to start your own studio, and how did Eternal Strands come about?
Well, definitely I guess a desire to move to small teams. I realized because I'd done some consulting. I went to Ubisoft for a while. Very cool. The Quebec City team of Ubisoft is actually pretty rad. Love the studio, love the city. Was excited to move back out east. But I was sort of reflecting on my career and thinking, one of the things I guess it always felt like the highlight to me was when we were working on, say, the DLC packs for Dragon Age or what have you, where it was a smaller story, a smaller group. It's a lot more focused. There was a lot less sort of communication overhead, and something about going into sort of a double A or triple I, or however you want to phrase it, kind of aiming to be, say, somewhere between 20, 50, 60 people, which is about where we're sitting right now at about 60, felt really appealing because it was a chance to sort of try to scope a project to a team that could fit that, to a budget that wasn't, soaring and enormous, and to not have the majority of the team be spread across like 3 or 5 time zones felt like it would be a nice change.
Yeah.
And that was a big draw, I think, for a lot of the folks who joined us early on, for my co-founders. Just getting back to basics, and also for me, I think a chance to get a little more hands-on again. Not only hands-on, but definitely to contribute more directly, because after a while you start to lose touch with the tools and such, and that I think you make terrible decisions if you don't want to do the like vision and high level stuff, but you also make bad decisions if you don't understand the moment to moment and what it's like to actually work in Unreal or a writing tool.
Yeah, I guess you can be directing a bunch of people to do stuff that you maybe no longer have any idea how to do. So
yeah, exactly.
What right do you have?
Yeah, at some point you kind of want to ask yourself, like, can I still do this? Like,
yeah.
I would also
move so fast too.
I would also imagine that once you're looking at like an Inquisition sized game, that from a certain high altitude, there's just bound to be tons going into the game that you're theoretically in a directorship over, that you don't even know what all is in there. Like it just reaches a size that it's impossible to know, even if it's down to very granular levels, but like individual lines of dialogue or all kinds of gameplay related things, and inventory items, all the stuff that you would normally be pretty hands-on about on a smaller project. I would think that it just reaches a point where it becomes impossible to know that, and that's its own form of trade-off, I guess, if not outright unappealing.
Or do you just live in meetings?
You do live in meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, at that point, you kind of have to, and you kind of acknowledge that there's a value to those meetings if they're purposeful, and if they come to an actual decision
Yeah.
to say, okay, look, here's what we're going to do based on the data. If you sort of are actively building the trust that you're pulling as much information out of the team before you make the decision, that they've got recommendations that you're listening to, things like that. Like there's good ways and bad ways to live in meetings. At a certain size, you have to, but you can still make that time a lot more valuable than just, oh well, let's reconvene next week. Like
Yeah.
no, you should be striving to reach an action plan and clear next steps. And
Yeah.
that it's sometimes you do really good at it, sometimes you don't. It's hard. It's a lot of effort, but
Yeah,
it was a nice change to be more like, okay, cool, I can literally see what's happening from here, so I have a better sense, and I don't need to dig for info, or people don't have to present me stuff as much.
Yeah,
that was
so
a
many
nice change.
slide presentations, man. It's such a thing. Like, obviously, my experience working AAA, working under Corey was, he was great at decision making, but like his time was just so hard to get. And when you have a team of like, I don't know, hundreds of people all trying to get something approved by a director, it just inevitably becomes a bottleneck, and that just kind of slows everybody down.
Yep.
It's a huge pain in the butt.
For both sides, honestly.
Totally, for everybody.
Because you're trying to maintain the rigor and attention and focus to make those decisions well, but there's a real fatigue that comes with that. You're like, okay, I don't, and you actually have to, I think there's a skill to be developed, which is to know when you're not in the place or position, or even just have the energy to make the decision that needs to be made, and to defer it, not because you don't want to make it, but because you want to make it well. And I have no litmus test for how you know exactly when it's the right time to make a call.
Totally.
It's just something that comes,
Vibes.
I guess, with time. But, to some degree, yes, right? Like,
I remember along that same kind of line, Ken Levine was, when talking about the team making their current game Judas being considerably smaller than the team that made Bioshock Infinite. Ken said something like, I don't really want to lead a team where I don't personally know everyone's name again. Like it becomes impossible to feel connected. I'm putting words in his mouth a little bit with the extrapolation from that, to be clear, but it seems like it's hard to stay connected to, all the nooks and crannies of this thing that you are making when you don't even know who all is doing
weird
stuff.
Thing. It's like so different to a film set or to indie, where I'm working on an indie game right now with 3 people. There's 3 of us. But I guess like working at Sony, some of the people at the studio were like fans of Corey, and that like when they would see him, he would be signing stuff. And that's like kind of crazy to think about when they're like your employees, but he's almost like this rare figure who didn't come to the office that often and became like, it's Corey,
It was
like
you.
It was every time. It was like, sign stuff for me again, Corey. Just like what a weird thing. I'd never even considered that you could not even know your team. You're not in charge of hiring anymore when projects get that big. And I guess, Mike, you started as a junior writer, so did I. Did you get to a point where you just weren't able to be creative anymore? Like when you're in so many meetings that you are restricted on. I've never wanted to be promoted when I was at Sony. I was like, please just let me write. I don't want to do any more meetings. Like, did you feel that too?
Oh, absolutely. I honestly, I wrote until I moved on to Dragon Age. So, maybe the first 5 to 6 years of my time at BioWare, and then tack another 9 years on that, where it was largely just leadership and stuff. Now, obviously, I got to work directly with the writers. I would be involved in early brainstorms for like core premises and stuff, but like, when you reach that point, you really need to develop trust with whoever is leading the writing or leading whatever. And I mean, it's interesting where you have, in my case, obviously, I had a better understanding of the writing discipline having done it directly, in the same way that a creative director who's come up through art or even through engineering or production, they will have different strengths and skill sets. And I think the best thing you can do, simply recognizing that at scale you can't be everywhere and should not be, because the bottlenecking becomes hyper intense.
Totally.
you have to get to the point where you have like really deep trust with the directors or leads or whatever kind of structure you have directly under you, and to say, look, you are an expert at this. My job is to ask questions and to kind of give you the context of where the rest of the project is heading, but I still need you to be sort of the operational kind of leader of this initiative, and we're going to have to work together on that, which is still, there's still a value to that. I think that's a very satisfying and validating thing to do, but it also is, it's very different from being able to go hands on and go, hey, I'll just put it in, which right now I'm at a scale where I can do that. I was literally fixing bugs with the tutorials today for a future patch. And because they were ones I wrote and I screwed something up. Turns out the fire minions do not heal in the fire. They did for a while and now they don't. So I'm going to fix that.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Total Strands player here. So where did Eternal Strands come from? Like, what was the foundation of this idea? Like, for anyone, from my perspective, for anyone listening who hasn't played it yet, it is very Breath of the Wild, Shadows of Colossus, a little bit Tears of the Kingdom, Dragon's Dogma. It's like very fun, exploratory RPG with cool magic. I'm very into it.
So I'd say there were a few kind of key things at play. The first was that, a lot of people on the team were very keen to kind of, I guess a lot of them had worked in Ubisoft, so they'd been working on, like, say, a historical fiction, like an Assassin's Creed or something like that, and they were kind of keen to get into fantasy. And on my side, I was kind of keen to get into like a lighter side of fantasy, having been through Dragon Age's sort of much darker, more Games of Thronesy style. But also a big part of it was that there was this fundamental idea of like, what if we could take a physics playground like a Breath of the Wild and bring that more into an RPG space? Because I think Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom feel very puzzle focused. Something like Shadow of the Colossus is almost a puzzle in terms that each Colossus is a puzzle. They don't have hit points or whatever. So that kind of drifted us towards sort of this like Breath of the Wild physics meets Dragon's Dogma, and Dragon's Dogma 2 hadn't been announced at that point, so it certainly was like a big draw. For me, I have remarkably fond memories of Dragon's Dogma 1, in part, I think, because John Epler, who ended up the creative director for Shipping Veilguard, was... he and I were kind of co-oping Dragon's Dogma 1 because he had built a really great support mage, and I had built like a fantastic tank
You had each
pawn.
other's pawns.
So we just kept swapping pawns and would get the update of her. I'm like, oh, you got her a new armor or whatever,
Hell yeah.
right? And we keep swapping. So to me, it was this. I was like, I have such fond memories of like leaping on creatures' backs and like climbing up them and setting them on fire and stuff like that. And
I love those games. Like such a
Yeah,
I think
so-
Dragon's Dogma 2 was my game of the year last year. Huge fan.
There you go. There you go. So you take kind of the physicsy playground of Breath of the Wild, you take that kind of large creature and like sort of hit point based action combat of Dragon's Dogma, and then recognize, I think for us, we felt that it was an opportunity that since the gameplay was so playful, like flinging stuff off and just yeeting it off of cliffs or like grabbing barrels and smashing them down or spreading fire and just watching the destructions, it felt fun. And so that led, I think, in a lot of ways to both the visual style, which is colorful and vibrant and sort of energetic in a lot of ways, a lot of motion, but also to the tone of the story, which I kind of steered to like, what if Indiana Jones or Lara Croft or Brendan Fraser's character in The Mummy had magical abilities and was set in a fantasy setting instead of sort of this 1920s pre-World War I or World War II, the bridging years in the 30s kind of thing. And I said, let's try that and see how it feels. And tonally, it seems to click that the playfulness of the gameplay meets the, I guess, optimism of the world.
Yeah, it's interesting. I never would have guessed the inspiration for the characters there, but it totally makes sense. I think the only time where I feel like maybe dread or sadness is seeing how like when they tell you the stories, if your party's telling you stories while you're walking through the city and it's totally empty, and they talk about like how much life used to be there, that can give you definitely be like, damn, this place really got messed up. But yeah, that tone definitely comes through.
Yeah, it was an interesting twist to basically go like, instead of this belongs in a museum, to actually play the like, what if this was your own culture that you've been cut off from, right? So rather than going to take the artifacts from another culture to instead sort of rediscover. If you were from Atlantis and finally it emerged from the ocean, you're like, oh, let's go home and see what happened. It definitely gives it a neat twist, and I think it does lead to some melancholy that especially comes from Aurea, because like she has that direct connection to the Enclave. So Aurea, in a lot of ways, like every character to some degree is struggling with their own personal demons. And kind of fighting through their preconceptions and so on. Sort of like that's where a lot of the tension in the Weaver band comes from, instead of interpersonal tension. And Aurea is struggling with her preconceptions of what her mom had told her, like, this place was so amazing, and she's sort of uncovering that Bryn's sort of uncovering that perhaps it wasn't the halcyon perfection that her mentor thinks it is, which I think is kind of a fun thing to explore.
So what was the hardest part about getting it all together? Like, how do you just start a 60-person team and then ship a game to what I've very positive reviews?
You start with a 15-person team.
That makes sense, yeah.
is job one, really having a really tight conception that kind of established the core kind of pillars of what we want to do, to bring physics into the play, to bring the thermodynamic, the ability for fire to spread or cold to like change states on metal to make them more brittle. We stood all that up quite early. And it was not visualized particularly well. It was not like a sexy, pre-release demo or anything like that. It was real gameplay, 100%. You could climb creatures in our second milestone, which was honestly pretty surprising to all of us. But it worked out well to be able to sort of stand up those core premises. And while we were doing that, we were sort of, I guess, concurrently doing world building and trying to establish sort of what kind of world could enable this kind of gameplay, right? Where, magic is sort of known, and where, well, we need the creatures to kind of come back. But we also don't want to do like an endless open world. So maybe there's like a travel. Could we do something like portals? Could we do something loom gates, and so on and so forth, right? So you start with, I guess, to me, the tentpole things that are going to make your game kind of like that the rest of the game needs to configure themselves around. Get those stood up as best you can, evaluate if they're the right call, and then start growing the team to know, like, okay, at some point this needs to stop being gray box art. This needs to, be final animations. We'll need sound design, and the team kind of grows organically from that based on need.
It's worth highlighting. One of the things that I thought was so cool is you're kind of gliding past it, but the vision was surprisingly clear for a new IP and a new team. Usually, like, I've worked with a lot of startup studios in my career. Most are not, like, when I go back to the earlier days of my career where that dominated who I was working with, obviously they were also, like I was at the time, no one was sort of hugely experienced with a lot of years in the industry yet. Whereas this team, despite it's a new team, but most everyone on the team is very much a veteran of the industry. And you feel that. So it has all or most of the strengths of the new team excitement, but without the sort of typical attendant weaknesses of like not knowing how to ship a game or having never done it to anticipate.
Right.
Austin, I don't know if I've ever asked you this before. I mean, Eternal Strange is a great example. You could give me any. What is your onboarding process? Like, because you're usually, I assume, not joining a project at the start. How do they get on board?
That's sort of what I was winding circuitously towards is that I, on this one and on most of the projects like this, that I would say, I'm on there pretty early, fortunately. And in the case of this one, the whole kind of rambling point I was making was that I was there way before 90% of the team. I was able to look at stuff when they had no publisher. They were just developing things. This was a new adventure for this very small core group of folks. And the vision that was presented for the game then feels like the game that was shipped. It wasn't just that, I should say I'm accustomed to things evolving quite a lot where you look back at the original pitch decks and stuff and you go, wow, we evolved quite far from that vision of the game, and usually, ideally, for the better, right? You think of better stuff, and you make discoveries as you go, or you hit some kind of technical roadblock that makes you have to kind of innovate in an unexpected direction, which then opens up a whole new direction for the game to go. And there's all these things that happen that you can't really plan for. And this one, despite there being, I'm sure, a million examples of all that kind of stuff, it's pretty cool that it was basically the game, like all the optimism and the colorfulness and especially the sort of core gameplay goals, that's like you said, the sort of thermodynamic magic and stuff. I mean, I know obviously at that point there was a point where that stuff didn't exist prior to me, but I feel like I was there so early that you guys just had it. You just had the premise. Which is
pretty
cool.
Crazy. Yeah, I feel like almost never happens. I guess that is happening with the indie game I'm working on, but the last game I was working on...
We'll see by the time it ships how
true. Good point. The last game I was working on changed so much that it could almost be like 2 games. Like it really, really evolved, and that's definitely a huge
it's not
thing.
Uncommon.
Well, so how do you avoid that, Mike? How do you...
Well, I wouldn't say we completely avoided it. We had a pretty big pivot right after we reached kind of what we'd call our alpha gate, where we were much more restrictive on what kind of powers you could take. What you could only sort of take ice or kinetic or flame, and we did a pretty big pivot to move, I guess, the game more into just like Horizon Zero Dawn or sort of Batman, where like your set of tools just keeps growing instead of being more exclusive and making choices. That was pretty fundamental, like in terms of just the overall play feel, but it didn't. None of the things were like wildly refactored as a result. I mean, we continued to tune, like the Fire Sword and Shield probably went through 4 iterations before we finally locked into the plant a bomb, send them flying that we have now. But I think in large part it was just sort of that there was and I guess it has to be a delicate balance. There was a urge to not like jerk the wheel just because, the worst example is like, oh, I played GTA something last weekend, so now we have, I don't know, cops and car chases.
It's the worst.
But we're a medieval caravan game, that's obviously exaggeration, but I think that
so many games have that though. The like shiny object, distraction thing.
Yeah.
True.
And you need to have some rigor to not do that, but at the same time, you need to have a sense of, I guess, flexibility to say, okay, this isn't working, this isn't landing, this does need to change, and we think there's a very careful, specific pivot we can do that will have minimal repercussions, but sharply increase the overall sort of, I guess, the fun of what you're going. And often that comes only from iteration and seeing it and playing it as you are. And I think one of our big revelations is initially the game was, I would guess, less quest heavy, less story driven in terms of like, why do I keep going further into the game, is because there's this crit path dragging me along. It was, I guess, even more systemic in terms of your progress. But we felt in time that sort of, partly as the voice actors started to come in and stuff, we started to see like, wow, there's really this drive through here. And that felt like a very smart pivot to do. So I think it's finding the balance, not getting distracted by the shiny thing, but also recognizing when something really isn't working. And I think, when I look at the game and how it's shipped and everything like that, for me, this is probably the one. Well, there's a whole bunch of disruption around, sort of not having a publisher and moving to self-published. I think there's upsides and downsides to that, but kind of doing it midstream is that we did miss out on a number of what I would have wanted to do, which is sort of some extensive user testing and so on at the very end. But that becomes a very expensive proposition when you're funding it yourself. And so we've had to rely more on like, people's feedback as they're playing and reviews and stuff, which is great because obviously we can still patch it. It's digital, and so on. So we are in fact doing that right now. But
on that thread, something that I've thought was really cool that I can't recall seeing very frequently in reviews, like obviously there's some reviewers that are very plugged into the industry and some that they just play a game and give their thoughts, but at a far higher batting average than I've typically seen, the reviews that had their issues or their quibbles all made a point of saying this is a new studio and it's a hell of an achievement for a new studio. So like, even if I have X or Y that I, that maybe I bounced off of or whatever about the game, I'm very excited to see what they do next. I felt like every review I read said that. I mean, probably not literally, but I never see that as like couched within, all reviews are like, here are the things I loved, here are the things that I didn't love. And almost all of them offered that seemingly as a caveat when saying the things they didn't like. They were like wanting Yellow Brick to be given some grace because they admired that a team of this size and that it was this crazy ambitious game for a new studio. I thought that was so cool that somehow made its way into like the bloodstream of the reception of the game. It sort of somehow became part of the story around it. And I never saw you. It wasn't like a marketing pillar of like from a brand new studio. Like but somehow I'm not imagining that, right? Like that really seemed like a constant thing that they were blown away by the newness of the studio, and that sort of framed,
I think,
everything they had to say.
From the outside, I don't know that I ever saw marketing for Eternal Strands. Sorry to who your marketing team is, but
no, it's not the team, it's the budget.
Okay, yeah.
Like that's it. With
it
given
the
shoestrings and elastic bands they had to work with, they actually did phenomenally. Okay. But yes,
I would
was
say
definitely a challenge.
For sure. That's what budget is, right? I would say it was marketed to me by friends who were giving me that pitch. So it kind of like, I feel like this game has like had a real tumble of like a community that's selling it to other people. And when I was told, they were like, "Oh, you love Dragon's Dogma, you like Magic, play this." But I was told in every single sentence where someone would say that to me that they were like, "This is the first game from the studio." So I think that like took a community sort of marketing life, because it is really impressive. Like it is a fantastic debut game.
Like discovering that like indie band that you're all excited to be this
is their first album.
You like, I knew them from before they were cool.
Yeah, exactly. And it works. It also, I think, gives you some curiosity. But am I misremembering that you did have a publisher at one point and then didn't anymore?
We did.
What happened there, if you're allowed to talk about it?
Not something we can really detail, but I mean, it was private division, and I think that they've been sold to Annapurna in the long time, so I think there was just a lot of turbulence happening around that time.
Yeah. So what is that? What did that adjustment period look like when you like don't have a publisher anymore all of a sudden?
you suddenly start going, well, we're gonna need someone to help with community and marketing internally, I suppose, and so on. So there are things you're not anticipating or expecting in terms of costs, in terms of talent sets you need to sort of ramp up and stuff like that. And I think we obviously there were a number of challenges, but I think we kind of steered into it with as much grace as we could. We got very lucky with a few very, very talented people. Natalie Pachelski joined in and is director of marketing, and she's great, absolutely phenomenal. And the team was able to, I think, largely continue to build the game we had, and I'll say that Private Division and Take-Two, they everything was as graceful as I think it could have been. Obviously, very, very disruptive, but I don't think there was a lot of ill will or sort of an intent for things to go poorly. I think we've even gotten notes from a number of the folks who worked directly with, who were like, "Congrats on the game, it's so fun. I'm glad you guys got out the door," and so on.
That's awesome.
But there were some sleepless nights and definitely a lot of chaos in it, and it requires sort of us to rethink the investment in the game and so on. And certainly there's the question of like, can we even finish this? And we were very lucky and very determined to do so, because we felt that it's important, I think, for the team to say we've come this far. We'd like to bring it home. We'd like to get it out the door. We'd like to get that initial round of feedback to see what is resonating with people in terms of the studio's kind of identity, but also where can we improve? What can we do better? And that's such valuable feedback. It's so much better than just shut her down, whatever.
Totally.
And so, but again, I think it was just a matter of, it wasn't luck. It was a matter of some very shrewd business decisions that kept the lights on to the point where we were able to come out. Yeah.
Did you
So
have to re-scope when that happened? Like, did you have scope meetings?
not significantly, simply because we were far enough into production
Gotcha.
that it would have been, I would say, more disruptive to start ripping stuff out because it was sort of like mostly there.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah, it
yeah,
felt pretty
there's
late in the overall
yep.
lifespan, all things
Yeah,
considered.
it was sort of into, I wouldn't say, like, it wasn't just, oh, we're just polishing. I wish it had been that close. That would have been much easier. But it definitely was sort of like the content was there, but we had, VO had only just begun and
Mm,
so on. So translation, only a bit had been done. So there was a lot of stuff that was in progress, but it was sort of queued up and ready to go. So it would not have, I think, been advantageous to just like rip scope out.
totally.
But we did have a few spots we knew we wanted to really focus on. We brought in additional combat design and stuff like that in order to help elevate it. I think there's still more work to do, but it's the patches I think are going to address some of that. But beyond that, it's just a matter of going, great. Let's take that as our learning experience, and
Hmm.
and now that we're over the hump of not having to buy computers, establish a studio, etc., mid 2020, which was its own special crazy time, we were all set to go to GDC 2020 to do pitches
Oh
and stuff, and that
no.
that didn't happen. So
No.
it's been a pretty wild ride all the way through,
Yeah, I
really.
mean, I guess you made a game in like one of the hottest times to make a new game in history, really. Like especially because no one was able to pitch to really anybody. Like it was
Right,
yeah, and you
right.
did, and it's great. So great
Yeah, and
job.
there's been this sort of industry sort of bloodbath that is hard to watch,
Yeah,
and we're trying to make sure we navigate that as best we can. Obviously, it's a challenging time for everybody,
yeah,
including us. But I think we will see what the future holds. But I'm pretty optimistic about where we're headed.
yeah. I guess an interesting thing you kind of. Oh, sorry, Austin. Go ahead. I feel like I'm asking a
Wow.
lot of questions.
No, no, I'm impressed that you clocked. I was gonna say something, but I was happy to just let you roll.
We've spoken for many hours at this point.
That's fair. That's fair. Um, I was just gonna say something else, just because I feel like in this call I'm in a position that it's unique to any of these that we've done in the past, where I obviously have a lot of insights into the inner workings of this team, but from the advantage of not being an actual
Hmm.
employee of the team. So I have like the sort of quasi objectivity of looking at it from the outside, and obviously not there day in day out, but attending most of their sprint reviews and kind of show and tells and things, and over the years that we worked on it. And I have to say, again, relative to most of the other teams, if not all the other teams I've ever worked with, I don't know that I've ever seen a group that was just so excited to be working on the game. Like they just loved the team uh camaraderie and sort of excitement for like when they would, do the sort of standard thing where you go around the room as it were on like the group Zoom calls of, the sprint reviews where it's like, okay, art department, show us what you got. Tech, what tools have been the latest out of your corner of the woods, that sort of thing. Everyone was like sort of chomping at the bit to show what they had done, and everyone else was so jazzed by what they were seeing.
Hmm.
But you got to tell her. This has been my favorite thing to tell people about. You got to tell a lot about Brick Weeks because I feel like this was a novel thing. I heard that was like a Google thing from someone at the launch party. I had never heard of this before, and to me, it's the most endearing, awesome thing. And I feel like so much of what you could say positively about the game comes from the kind of mentality that spawns a thing like Brick Week. So I tee you up, sir.
I guess that's my cue. Yeah. The Brick Weeks were a lot of fun, and they were essentially, hey, we've hit the end of a milestone, or we've hit hey, we just finished pre-production or something like that. We would essentially say, okay, we would try to get the planning for the next milestone, everything done ahead of that, because you have to You have to do high level, like, okay, well, if the next milestone is going to be production, it's going to be a year or a year and a half or whatever. So does it still fit? Can we still scope it and so on? So that was pretty arduous. Those would be like 3-day offsites with the directors and leads and everything, and sort of poking around in Handsoft or Helix Plan as it's called now, but you know allocating tasks and that kind of stuff. So that was pretty dull. But what we would try to do to start the new phase of the project would be to say it's a week. If you're doing something, it should be on or about the game. Go nuts. Put something in. Prototype an idea you've had. Like our very first dialogue portraits were done during a Brick Week by our character lead. There were different mechanics that were put in terms of like, oh hey, this is a way we can have the void zones cause certain things to heal or react differently. A lot of that kind of stuff came out of the team just sort of poking at
That's
things
really
and sort of
cool.
trying it. Yeah.
Were you allowing people to be like cross department? Like, could
Mhm.
someone who works on animation could just write
Oh yeah.
something? That's really, really
or
cool.
people would form pods and like small teams of 5 or 6. It would be like,
Like mini
hey,
game
we worked
jams.
at weather.
That's
Yeah, we do a
really cool.
like a little mini game jam. So a lot of the kind of final visualization of like the flash freezes and that kind of stuff came out of like a group going, let's just push this forward because it will answer a lot of questions for us, and we're going to skip the line and not do it when it was planned.
That's
And that
awesome.
was exciting.
It's a
They were
really
just
good
like,
idea.
it'd be great, but also if like we can have the VFX person and and a bunch of the level artists and the shader guy, we can have it done in a week. And sort of they just wanted to try it. It was really really cool.
And a
It
great way to
actually,
strengthen the team too, right?
Yeah.
People working
Yeah,
with each
you
other
might be
normally
working with people
wouldn't.
you're not used
Yeah.
to. Yeah.
well, yeah, watching those team calls of everybody showing what they did during the Brick Week was just so
That's really
thrilling
cool.
because no one knew what to expect. Like it would be like, oh, here's a thing that we did, and because it had not been asked for necessarily or wasn't on the docket of a thing that was supposed to exist. It was just like, here's an idea that came about. I guess the only analogy now that I hear you talking about it again, I guess in theory this is the way that Valve supposedly sort of operates all the time.
Yeah.
Sort of directionlessly. Like what
It's why they release so
what are
many
you
games.
excited to work on? I mean, I've always, I hear it described in very utopian ways, and I hear it described in very dysfunctional ways from, people that don't work there. So I don't know, but it always seems like the whole premise, obviously, is
Yeah, they don't have like a leadership structure. I only know two
is that
people
it's
who've ever worked there, and they both still do and still really like it. Like, they have a wonderful time working there.
yeah, their audio director is a good friend, and he's been there a long time. And when I've worked with them on Counter-Strike, it always feels, from my point of view, like traditional game dev because they're like, here's what we need, and here's how it's going to work, and here's the dates, and so I don't get a sense, but that also could be wrangling an outside contractor is a different beast entirely from how things are done internally. I wouldn't know. All I know is that the Brick Week thing, I just remember going, this should be industry wide.
Very cool.
Because you get all these people, around these milestone sort of cadences, who are just like, they're just getting invested because now there's some piece of them in the game. There's some personal thing that was kind of a flight of fancy. And you also learn stuff. You probably, I mean, I don't know of any examples offhand, but I would just hypothesize that there must be experiments that sort of fell flat that then were hugely valuable because you would go, oh my God, now that we know that
not knowing
that's
when something doesn't work,
not going to work. Yeah. And spare yourself that
There's
headache.
also a lot of value in that, like, so like when we were in between our milestones at Sony, the departments would present to each other what we were working on, which I actually still really enjoyed, but it was all just the tasks that you had been assigned, and then you would see like what another department worked, and they would really encourage us to like go around and check out other things, and there were things being made that I would be like, I didn't even know that was being made. It was very cool. But hypothetically, because I would never want to get anyone under any scrutiny, hypothetically, if you had an idea that like you really wanted to work on, but it wasn't under your assigned task list, hypothetically, people would kind of start little rogue groups and they would try to find hypothetical time to work on those little rogue things so that they could then pitch
Right.
them. Whereas you're basically letting people flex that at a known point in time repeatedly. Like it's probably happening in a lot of big studios anyway, that people like, I have this idea. It's not under my, like my producer hasn't assigned me time to work on it, but I really want to do it. But you're being like, no, you will have this week where you will get to do all of those cool things that you're otherwise not able to. I can't even. That must be so healthy for the people who work there.
It's like a pressure release valve.
Yeah.
Like, I have this little thing I wanted to have in the game or I wanted to at least see if this would work, or an animator just doing one like rogue. Like I just want to put this in because I think it'll be funny or cute or it'll really add to that character's sort of their demeanor or whatever, right? And the thing is, not everyone did it. Some people just carried on with tasks. Usually we were by kind of saying, hey, look, we're shifting phases into production or whatever. You normally have like a long road ahead of you. So our hope was that people wouldn't feel like so crushed they couldn't do Brick Week. But some people also just used it for skill building. Like I'm gonna deep dive into Excel, or I'm gonna like take a class on doing better PowerPoints or something like that. Or I'm going to learn some new stuff about Unreal because I haven't worked with it very much. That kind of stuff can be really powerful. But if someone came to me and said like, hey, can I write like a bit of fiction that we could put in the codex or something like that later, I'd be like, let's do it.
That's awesome. So where did that idea come from? Why did you start doing that?
Well, it is originally. I think it was I'm half remembering this because this goes back quite a few years. Is that there was sort of this idea of Google Fridays, that there were sort of like the afternoons on Fridays you could sort of work on whatever. You could kind of break outside of your normal thing. And I remember we did try it back at Bioware for a while on DA. We did. It was one of Mark Darrow's initiatives. He just wanted to see how this would work. It worked very well and works. It does work better in earlier phases when there's more kind of room and flexibility where you aren't kind of burning to final. And it was something that Jeff Skalski, who's sort of one of my co-founders and sort of our head of production and kind of operations, he is a big fan of giving people this kind of time and stuff. I'm not sure actually if he picked it up when he was at Mythic because he worked on like their big MMOs and that kind of stuff back then. But yeah, it was something he brought forward originally, and I was all for it because I'd seen it, be just cool to be like, hey, let's take a Friday now and then and just sort of do something. But the idea of a week allows you to tackle a slightly bigger project, or dive into a 3-day course or something like that, which can be very, very useful, I think.
Very cool. The question I was going to ask before I decided to let Austin speak for 2 minutes. Graciously, everybody's saying it.
Generous host that you are.
In losing a publisher, there's so much more to making a game now than just making a game. And you kind of mentioned that you had to figure out who internally could help with things like community management. How do you approach the whole picture? Because, like, I know it used to be a thing as a writer. I have a friend who's a journalist at the New York Times, where she's no longer able to just be a writer. She's like, I probably should start making TikTok videos. I don't want to, but I probably should for the future of the health of my career. She's got to start doing a podcast. It's like, even I recognize that, I guess, when I started in media, that you have to do all of these things now. You used to just be able to kind of release a game on Steam. You can't really do that anymore. So you now have to like
a clip the other day that was going viral with, which actress was it, where they were saying we will or will not greenlight the film based on the Instagram following of the cast that you're choosing?
How awful.
Like it's because it's exactly what you're saying. It's if you want to be an actor, especially if you want to be like a movie star level actor,
you also have to be a social media manager.
You can't not
or have one.
Yeah.
Like if you want to be this private Keanu Reeves type, it's like, nope, sorry,
not allowed anymore.
You must be, this outward.
Yeah, you can't
Anyway,
just do the
it's
art. I guess my question was like, in losing a publisher who would have, in theory, provided you those resources, how did you pivot to figuring out? Was it like you found someone internally? Did you hire someone? How did you figure out who would do all of the publishing stuff when you're just trying to do the make game stuff?
So we a mixture. We both brought people in that had sort of expertise in working with marketing, community, that kind of management. But we also internally, a number of members of the team, especially on our production side, had worked with external partners, had done kind of all the various bits of paperwork to work through publishing and that kind of stuff. So we had, and I think this goes back to Austin's point of like, not all of the team are like in AAA veterans, but we had enough that you know our audio director has worked with Side UK multiple times, so it wasn't burdensome for Aldo to be able to pick up some of that while then also working with our production team to help coordinate with the the work orders and that kind of stuff. So we had a mixture of goodness, frog and throat. Sorry, I'm fighting a little bit of a cold. We had a we had a mixture of some degree of internal knowledge plus also some very targeted people to bring in to say, okay, let's shore up where we don't have this, and that becomes, of course, a surprise for sure. But at the same time, you do have to try and look at, as Trick Weeks, who good friend of mine and Veilguard writer, used to jokingly call it the Christotunity, right? It's yes, it's exploding, but think of the amazing things we will learn from
That's
this.
funny.
And so you try to steer into it and say, okay, well, regardless, we are now going to be better positioned
To do it
with
again.
or without a publisher to do it again. Because even with a publisher, you're still able to anticipate when things are coming. You have an internal team that can coordinate better. So there's ups and downs. Certainly, it's hard to lay track while the train's in motion, for sure. But at the same time, um, with the right people who've sort of lived in this space before, you can find a path through. And in our case, like, yes, things could have been smoother, but at the end of the day, the game shipped, and everyone that goes out is a small miracle. So
Yeah, and from
that's
the
how I look at it.
outside, it doesn't appear to have any of those problems. Like, even you talking about things that we need to fix and patch, I couldn't even guess what they are. Like, I had no issues with this game whatsoever. So,
Hmm,
again, you did a great job.
thank you. That's
um,
very, very kind.
um, so we have a lot of game devs who listen to this show. For having to self-publish for the first time, was there anything about that you didn't expect, or like anything about it that was like you wish you had known ahead of time?
That's a tricky one.
Or I guess just a piece of knowledge about self-publishing a game for the first time that you would want to impart on someone who might want to do that.
I guess uh, this is kind of industry wide, but especially so when you're dealing with any kind of self-publishing, it means you're going to by necessity have to interface with external partners and platforms. And um, I think our takeaway experience is that on the whole, uh, folks at Steam and folks at Game Pass and so on and so forth were rooting for us. Like
Hmm.
they were, I guess, very helpful and accommodating, and in a way there was some sense of like, oh, okay, your crew, the Yellow Brick crew, are actually much more prepared than we're used to dealing with,
Hmm.
which is nice because again we could anticipate it. But I do think that um, if I had sort of a blanket piece of advice, it would be to not treat those platforms and stuff as necessarily adversarial. I think
Hmm.
that they recognize that having products on their channel, platform, delivery system, subscription service, whatever, is to their advantage.
Interesting.
But at the same time, it is very, very difficult right now, I think, to even with like good partnerships on there and building up like the interpersonal things. In our case, we definitely found that conversations we'd had at GDC 2 years earlier suddenly became very important because we knew some people we could talk to who could at least point us at the people we talked to. So
Yeah.
that kind of
Mm.
soft networking and trying to reach out and just maintain a relationship where people are like, oh yeah, we've heard of you, and we had a really nice conversation over a coffee one time, can pay off. But at the same time, right now it is, and it's challenging to get noticed unless there is a marketing campaign behind it. There's a
Hmm.
lot of challenge, even with word of mouth and that kind of stuff, and it's very rare to sort of get like Lord love him, a Balatro or something, right, that just
Yeah.
explodes.
Yeah.
It's funny because I often, for me, whenever people are like, oh man, I wish we could have an overnight success, I'm like, yeah, like Among Us, which I think was out for what, 3 years
Yeah.
before it suddenly
Yeah.
exploded.
Yeah.
Like, it's strange how that kind of thing plays out.
Bastion.
Yeah.
We wouldn't know about Supergiant, but Bastion was. It's because of
Totally.
the Steam summer or Steam fall sale.
And
Yep.
it
It had
was
been
like
out for
Xbox Winter
months.
of Arcade thing that they did as well. It was like the same. Well, it was Winter because it was in Australia. They did the same thing. They had it on Xbox, like the thing that
Right.
was before
It was-
Xbox Gold.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only reason I played it.
Yeah, and then
Yep.
suddenly everyone's like, "Oh wow, this is awesome!" And
Look what we have today.
and then yeah, that because they've been entirely
The legacy.
self-published since then.
Man.
the Bastion was originally Warner Brothers, and
Was it really? I did not know that. Wow.
and it came out and
Huh.
and was kind of like cool, and it's like think about the discoverability in 2011 or whatever versus today. And
I
like
guess
they
Bastion was very unique at the time, but like Rocket League's another example of that. Rocket League was really only successful and shaped that whole studio because it was on PS Plus. Like, using
I
those
love
things to your
the
advantage is crazy to think about.
the overnight, non-overnight successes. A composer friend of mine, a guy named Jeff Beal, scored the show House of Cards, which was like Netflix's first big explosive hit, right? And he got all this attention for the music. And it was like, I remember talking to his wife because I had been a fan of this guy since I was in college, and he had won multiple Emmys, and he had done a ton of big shows before this. He had done, Rome for HBO, and he did Monk, and he did Carnival on HBO, and a ton of stuff. Bunch of movies, Ed Harris's movies like Appaloosa and that Jackson Pollock movie, but suddenly it went from the whole world who pay attention to soundtracks did not know who he was to suddenly the whole world did. And I remember talking to his wife, and I said, it's so cool as a long-running fan of his, it's so cool to see suddenly everyone noticing. And she goes, he's a 20-year overnight success. And I've that phrase has stuck with me so much since then. It's like Among Us, where it like trust that if the product is good and you stay the course, hopefully people will eventually find it and sing its praises.
And what I just always think about what cool stuff Inner Sloth have done with that. Now they also have Outer Sloth. And apparently they've been wonderful to work with from everybody that I've asked, because I was asking about publishers to work with because of games. And everyone,
by the way,
it was
as a
very
heads
interesting
up,
to get inside reports, but if you've really, sorry, do you need to go?
I have to leave right at the half past. I'm happy to just duck
Austin,
out and let you
how
guys
was
keep
your
chatting.
experience working on Eternal Strands?
I say all these things, teeing up Mike to tell all these stories because of how wonderful it was. I love being in there early. We were able to experiment, on different sort of conceptions for the score, and then found an approach. Obviously, that's its whole other conversation, but I'm happy to keep this not about music today, but the it was a pure joy. I mean, honestly, it was an absolute delight. I love the game. I love working with Mike and Jeff. One of the other founders was kind of my initial link because he had been a producer on Assassin's Creed Syndicate. So he and I knew each other, and I was super stoked to see him starting a new studio, and we were all in touch. And then they brought in Aldo, who I had been trying to work with for years. Aldo was an audio director on like half the Assassin's Creed games, and he and I were kind of mutual admirers, and had a few kind of near misses, as it were, of collaborating, but I just admired him, and friends of mine who'd worked with him always just had such good things to say. And he's a rare breed of someone who is very creatively engaged, but shockingly technical. I mean, like his level of technical understanding. He's one of the few audio directors who can go in and modify things in Unreal and in blueprints and just really very at home in the game dev environments for an audio guy. And so, honestly, it was, I absolutely loved it. It's been so nice to see it get out into the world, and my Twitter algorithm has thoroughly come to understand that I like Eternal Strands content. And so I get like all this stuff from people, just the game screenshots like so well. It's just so pretty. And I just love seeing the reaction it's gotten. So yes, I do have to go. I have only positive things to say, genuinely, really legit. That's why I was all too happy to set this up, because not every team sticks the landing, and not every team is, quite as fun to work with as it might appear from the marketing materials.
Everybody else that Austin works with, he's really negative. Really
like fucking Bithell Games.
Especially Bithell.
Oh. And anyway, it was a delight. I leave you guys to it. Catch you later. Mike, always a pleasure. See ya.
Bye.
See you, bud.
I guess on that note, Mike, how do you pick a composer? How does that work? I have no idea.
He called us.
He's desperate for
Seriously, he did.
He really?
He did, because he'd worked with Jeff. He was like,
No
hey, what are
way.
you guys up to over there? What are you doing? And we were
Wow,
like,
it had never occurred to me that you could do that.
Yeah.
Wow. Huh. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, no,
Well,
it's a beautiful
as he
score.
said, he'd worked directly with Jeff. He was excited to see what we were up to, and just sort of initially set out a feeler. But I mean, um, for me, when it comes to any other composer picking, I mean, there's obviously some degree of like who are potential names, who are that kind of stuff. But I mean, like a lot of partnerships, what you want to do is sort of meet with folks who have done game compositions, because game composition, of course, is
Whole other thing.
so it's very technical,
Hmm.
right? It's there's a lot of stuff shifting in and out, and working with a lot of stems that mix dynamically and stuff that's very different. And then from there, it's sort of it's a mixture of both. What is their resume? Sure, but honestly, a lot of it comes down to, do they get the project?
Mm.
Is there good chemistry? Do they seem to push in a direction with some of their initial explorations that make you go, ooh?
Mm.
Because, I mean, unless you have someone very strongly musical on your team, you don't usually have a clear sense of where you want to go immediately. And you definitely don't want to be like, well, let's just do Hans Zimmer, right? Like, you don't want to just
Mm.
give me that with the serial numbers filed off, right? You want a
Yeah.
composer to own and push in their own
It
direction.
is kind of a
Um,
uniquely outside thing where like the internal team may have they have a vague understanding, but they
yep,
couldn't tell you what the sound's actually going to be, and it's like maybe one of
exactly.
the only disciplines that applies to.
I would say the other place where you have the serendipitous surprise for me is voice acting,
Oh,
where
totally.
you provide the script and you sort of know, like, you've given some sort of précis, right? It's like, oh well, for Dom I need sort of maybe a little bit of a Doctor Strange,
Yeah,
but not
give me
as
this character
arrogant,
and this
more,
character with some of the yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
push into this space or whatever, and then Alex Jordan comes along and just crushes it with his audition. You're like, well, that's what
And
Dom
it can
sounds
change
like.
the way that you write stuff too, right? You're like, oh, this
Exactly.
is not at all what I expected, and is actually way better. And then you have to
Yeah,
adapt
exactly.
everything.
So yeah, it's always interesting to do the revisions on, okay, they've done their first session. I just listened to them talk for 4 hours. I am going to go tweak some things.
Totally.
And we might even retake a few key lines that I think they could do better if I changed the way it was written.
Do you ever change
So
it like
and I love that experience.
100? Getting to work with people who are like really really excel in a creative field that you do
Right.
not, I think is super inspiring. Like that's part of why I think I like game development in general, is that you work with a team of people who can do a bunch of stuff that you can't do. They're like a
Yes.
total expert in something that like I don't even understand. And then everyone's always, everywhere I've done this now has been so open about teaching me things.
Yeah.
Like I remember getting an email once about something to do with like jiggle bones. Like it was some term that I was like, "What the hell is this?" Just
Well, that sounds lewd.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was ridiculous, whatever it was. And then I sent an
Yeah.
email, being like, "Hey, I'm not in this department, but I got this email. Can you tell me what this is?" And they sent like a full email reply, including gifs, explaining to me exactly. It was just so cool to be like, "This is a whole. You're working on the same thing as me, but I don't know what the hell this is."
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
super inspiring, and yeah, actors especially. I feel like you go, "Oh, damn, that's way better than I would have thought. You're
Yeah.
incredible."
Yeah, and your director's just pulling some magic directly out of them, and yeah, it's phenomenal.
Very cool.
And I like that when you have an external group that surprises you, and um, but they clearly get what's going on, and are excited to be a part of it. So
Not to put you on the
I
spot
find
here with, oh,
I
sorry, go on.
find it humbling.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
find it humbling, right? When people are like, oh, this is very good, right? Like over something you've written, or just some good, like you show them a quick cutscene or something, like, and obviously they're being polite because there's a job, but you can generally tell when they're just being polite.
For sure.
Yes.
I was gonna say, not to put you on the spot here, but I was gonna ask, like, how did you go about picking this team of AAA veterans? Like, I'm the reason I'm not
Mm.
trying to put you on the spot is I'm not trying to make you single out employees that you especially love or something. But like, how, like, if you have, I'm sure you know a lot of people.
Hmm.
You have a lot of veterans. What are you looking for in those particular people when you're hiring for this project?
Well, I think a big first step, of course, is understanding the needs of the project. Like, we need someone who is a physics specialist, or someone
Right.
who is really, um, really passionate about the three C's, right? Character control, movement, and camera, right? And you just want someone who's really into that, because we're going to be climbing creatures who are in
Mm-hmm.
motion, right? So that's literally a nightmare scenario. And you want an artist who wants to work on fantasy. You want,
Yeah.
an audio director. In our case, we got very lucky with someone who's very technical, because Aldo was able to backfill a lot of stuff that might have needed a tools programmer earlier. right?
So I guess that's why the
So
15 people at the start works really well, right? You started with 15, you figured out what those
yes,
needs were, and then expanded.
small group, exactly. And then while you're kind of building and scoping the project, you're like, okay, well, as we ramp up, what would we need? So
Mm.
we have a character artist, but she's going to need more members on her team.
Mm-hmm.
But we have one who's particularly great at creatures and one who's particularly great at characters, right? And they can both cross that, but it sort of rounds out the overall design. And I think that the other big thing that we did, which I think, I mean, I'm not going to say best practice because that sounds super egotistical, but like a thing that really worked for me was one of the last phases of hiring, obviously under NDA, is I would pull out roughly the same pitch, but it got updated over time that we'd use to pitch the game to the publishers, and I pitched the game to the employee.
Hmm.
So before they joined on, they knew exactly what they'd be building.
So that's what the
And
question I asked Austin earlier about what he gets, you were
yeah,
literally pitching. That's really cool.
absolutely, absolutely. And so I have probably pitched Eternal Strands like 80
Yeah.
times, right? Because you also like it's the Game Pass team. All right, what is Eternal Strands? Hey,
Yeah.
dog and pony show in this economy. But the big thing for me was that having a team that went, oh, okay, cool, I get what you're building. And then we would always try to show sort of a video or two from like our last sprint review or something that was sort of like, here's where we're at now. Typically the response would be, wow, you're further ahead than I would have thought, given where you're at in development. But that was kind of secondary to me to someone who thought that would be a cool thing to work on.
Yeah.
And that really helps with just sort of that initial, I guess, gel of the team. But also, they got to meet me, they got to meet, whoever they'd be working with directly, but they also got to ask questions around that project they'd just been shown.
It's a very
Which
good
I
idea.
think is important.
Yeah, I mean, because then
It lets them,
you're also making sure
yeah,
you're working with people who are excited and understand. Because I feel like there are a lot of game studios that have really bad onboarding processes where they just give
right.
people a bunch of stuff to read.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or like slideshows of art, right? Like that, giving them a presentation is a much better idea, especially if you've got it down.
With a Q&A at the end too.
Yeah.
To say, hey, what questions do you have about this before you sign on? Obviously, please don't. I hope you weren't live tweeting this or something, but like we want people to feel like, yes, this is a project I want to be able to ask questions about.
That is a very
Where
good
do you want
idea.
to go? Where do you see the company going? All comes out of like, okay, if you're building this, what's next? And that I think is good to get people this sense of like, hey, am I joining a company that, well, the name partly comes from like wanting to build a road, right? To keep going and build it brick by brick kind of vibe. So
Very cool.
yeah.
Do you have anything else you would like to share, or where can people find Eternal Strands? Where can people find you?
Oh, we can just do that part. Yeah. So Eternal Strands is on Game Pass, so obviously PC and Xbox. It's available through Xbox through normal channels as well. You can pick it up on PS5. It's on the Epic Games Store. It's also on Steam. So basically, as they say over in Skill Up, all platforms save the Switch. So
It is very fun. I'm really, really enjoying it. Like
good.
not
I'm really
finished,
really
but
glad.
yeah, having a great time.
Good. Yeah, it's a game where I think I guess the one war story I have is definitely one you were asking like, hey, what would you fix? I mean, there's one thing that I wouldn't necessarily fix, but I recognize it's not the strongest suit, is that because the game does a bunch of stuff that it's not like intuitively been done before, like, oh, I can cool a path through this big cataclysmic firewall the dragon just left using ice magic. So having to teach that, I think, isn't necessarily the most like fun. Wow, I'm sliding down the back of a rocket launcher or some kind of like crazy moment. But we definitely have to. What we found in any playtest we did, and friends and family and stuff, is that people got very overwhelmed with the amount of, I guess, the possibility space. So we sort of ramp you in a little slowly, which I think is much better than overwhelming you and leaving you just going, "Hi, what the hell's happening?" Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's people who would be like, "I'd rather have just been dropped right in," which is interesting to me. That's just like, cool. We'll take a look at that for the next game and see what we can do. But definitely, I think that like you're saying, you're into the game and so on and so forth. I think it's a game that sort of, the more you experiment, the more you play with it, the more it starts to. I always joke to the team, like, I would like the game to say yes more than it says no. Like, hey, can I throw this thing off a ledge? Oh, I can. Hey, can I throw this thing into another thing?
The first time that I realized
that,
my boyfriend was sitting next to me while I was playing it, and the first time that I realized that, like, I don't know what they're called. They're enemies with the shields. Very difficult.
Oh, the Arc of the Tower.
Yeah,
Yeah.
real tough. I would just pick them up and drop them off. And I
Yeah.
didn't know that I could do that. And I think I was sitting next to him giggling and being like, I just realized that I can drop these guys just off the edge if I want to. It's the best.
And at later levels of Weaver's Grasp, you can rip their shield out of their hand and throw it right back in their face.
Oh, I look forward to
It
it.
feels great.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. There was a question that I wanted to ask you, which is very inside baseball.
Sure.
So for anyone who hasn't played a ton of Strands, I'm sorry. I was just curious. Why did you decide to approach the loot system the way that you did? Like it's so crafting focused. In a way that I think is very fun. Like one of my favorite moments of the game so far has been it was really early and I went to this area and I left it and I went back and I realized it had fundamentally changed in that period of time. But I could no longer walk around there because I wasn't equipped. And I was like, oh, this is a puzzle that I have to figure out. But I love that the game didn't say, you want to know what's happened here. Like I just found that myself. But then I had to craft to basically fix that problem. Why did you decide to go with that crafting focused instead of like find cool sword and chest focus?
Well, it was sort of with the thermodynamic basis. I guess one of the fundamental things about the game is that the temperature, the heat, the cold, and the damage you're taking to a lot of degrees is directly impacted more by the physics of the moment rather than like a damage table, like like rolling 3d6 or something like very specific. So recognizing that we were going to play with like we wanted a dragon's breath in a forest to be like genuinely dangerous because the fire would keep spreading and the trees would burn and they're exothermic, so they make it hotter, which makes it harder to deal with. And that kind of pushed us towards the idea of like what tools could we give the player to deal with this. And certainly we have the resistance files that you have a limited number of, and they help a ton. But if you want to get to the point where you're like, hey, I'm not really dealing with that. I am, however, balancing my weight versus my mobility, things like that. It just felt like tools we could put in the player's hand that let the physics shine and let the playful kind of toy box
makes a ton of
shine.
sense.
Yeah. So then, Fred Saint Laurent, who's our game director, it's one of his passions and the thing he's always wanted to do is the idea of like you're building your armor out of materials. And a thing for me that's interesting is I find when a game has crafting and a store, people tend to gravitate to the store because it's sort of the path of least resistance. Yeah. So with the setting that we built and with sort of the premise of you're going into this sort of lost land, a store didn't really make a ton of sense. Why would my friends, and one of whom's a smith, sell me things? So that led to kind of this narrative hook that also empowered to, oh yeah, if you can bring it back, we'll make you a cool pair of pants. No props. We're happy to do it. And that just led to an interesting and I think satisfying loop where you're not just going out and breaking chests and stuff, which is fun and those work, but also like taking down the big creatures can drop the best loot, and there are like breaking pieces off them like Monster Hunter will also drop more loot. And then if you get in a mastery level play, you start to realize that if you go to something like the Arc of the Arc of the Stricken Earth, who's the big guy with the staff that you fight right at the beginning. He doesn't have his staff in the first encounter. But if you superheat his armor, that heat actually causes a phase change in the armor, so it drops higher quality materials if you break it off. Not if you snap it off of the little weak points, but if you break it off, it will be much more likely to drop higher quality materials than it would. So it kind of bumps from say purple to legendary kind of with an orange or gold. So it let us be playful.
Yeah, it makes a lot
and
of
playful
sense.
was really the name of the game
because it is very unique. That system is unique. Like it makes sense that you'd approach an RPG and go, well, yeah, and then they get a bigger sword, and then they get a bigger sword, and that's what no one would be upset with you for doing that. So the system obviously worked for me, but I couldn't articulate why it was there. And it makes a lot of sense that you were like, well, we know that the physics is a very important, if not the most important part of the game in terms of what you do moment to moment. So that is the answer to that. It makes perfect sense.
Balancing your heat, cold, and your weight all kind of impacts your moment to moment gameplay. And it also means that the decisions that the gameplay team came up with, like, no, you're not gonna lose your materials. If you want to break something down and try something else, I think that really encourages experimentation. Like, hey, what if I changed out this material for this material? Could I upgrade it then? Oh, I could, and so on. So it lets you be, I guess it's a low risk investment.
Yeah.
You can build something, take it out and go, no, it feels a little too heavy. I'm going to go switch to this lighter material.
Yeah.
Or maybe pull a single piece of this off because I want the mana regen from the other suit of armor, right? And I was missing. I just feel like I can't quite do the magic as much as I want to.
Yeah, I forget the word, but there's like when you're crafting, there's like a resmith kind of option where you can reforge, yeah, which I thought was really
so it lets
smart
you swap the materials one for one.
Yeah.
Nothing gets lost, it all gets returned and that kind of stuff. So yeah, you can upgrade it. You can also reforge it and upgrade it, and then the upgrade reforges will just cost more because it still stays level 3. Bunch of fun toys and tools essentially to play with. And I think it makes it good.
None of it's wasted. That's a really nice thing to me. I'm never throwing stuff away because I always have someone give it to. Like literally never am I like, oh, wood. Like it's always useful because the way the camp upgrades work, which is also really smart. It never feels like I'm, getting a bunch of crap I don't need. I need all of it.
And a little further in the game, it stays useful as well. I don't think it spoils too much. There is the option to trade up. So, it's at a significant loss, but you can take a bunch of the old kind of weaker stuff and turn it over into a higher quality material if you want to. So players who are looking to get a very specific suit of armor, a particular look, and they're, one shy or whatever, that system's in place so that you can pursue that and be like, oh, good, there's the 6th piece of Drake scale or whatever I needed.
Well, you're absolutely right. You made a fun game. It feels very fun to play. I highly recommend it. I'll leave a link in the description to where people can check it out. And Mike, where can people find you?
These days, I am pretty much on Blue Sky.
Cool.
That is like my go-to. It's just Mike. Is it .Laidlaw? No, I think it's Mike Laidlaw, all one name.
I'll find the link.
Yeah, it's Mike Laidlaw. Just all there. And there's a picture of me. I used to be holding a bag of oatmeal for. I honestly don't even remember why I took that photo.
No reason
now
not to.
Now it's the nicer one. Yeah. But yeah, it's just there, and I mostly post dad jokes. Let's be real.
Hell yeah.
And retweet a bunch of stuff about Eternal Strands these days because it's really nice to see when people take cool screenshots and stuff. I'm like Austin. I'm like, oh.
I mean, it's lovely when the thing you've been working on for years comes out and people like it, right? Like, isn't that what we all want at the end of the day?
Yeah.
Love to see it.
Yeah. Well, and I was having a lot of fun, for some time going. Well, I mean, maybe there's romances. I mean, who knows? Maybe. Anyways, for Valentine's Day, we rolled out some cards, so I guess I had to own it.
Hell yeah.
I'm like, yeah, go ahead, you can smooch. Enjoy, have fun.
Give the people what they want. Well, thank you so much for chatting today. I really appreciate it. Thank you everyone for listening.
That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and welcome back anytime you want to talk about game development. Just let Austin know. We'll figure it out.
As long as the other Mike isn't present.
Yeah, as long as Mike's not here. We can't.
Okay.
Some heathen?
Please give him my regards, by the way. He's a lovely man.
Will do. I'll say, hey, other Mike said hi.
Other Mike said hi.
Yeah, he did want to be here, but it was just a schedule. It happens. But thank you for watching, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye.